Poor Cynthia. Cynthia had a great wedding day. She found the right guy. They just had a good marriage from word go. They loved each other. They had 4 kids together. But for the first 15 years of her marriage, she wasn't real happy for one other reason. Much as she loved her husband, much as she loved her kids, she couldn't stand her mother-in-law. It's true. Absolutely true. Absolutely did not get along with her. They would try to talk to each other, and it would be one-word sentences and answers to each other. They went to the same church, if you can imagine that. And every Sunday they would pretend not to see each other and sit on opposite sides of the sanctuary. Isn't that horrible? Family events were just torture for every single person in the room. That'd be tough. That would be. They just did not like each other. It was to a point where Mom, who was generally a good Christian church-going lady, the dad's mom, she'd invite the dad over to lunch with the parents, and Cynthia and the kids were never included. It was bad. With time, Cynthia started to realize something, though. Maybe part of the reason that her mother-in-law treated her so bad was, in this case, because she had treated her so poorly. See, Cynthia had grown up with a very abusive dad, and she had a lot of unresolved unforgiveness towards her dad. And she never really dealt with that, never really learned how to forgive him. And so she had developed this animosity towards parental figures. And then mother-in-law comes into life, and she realized she might be doing a little bit of transference here. That the root of her problem wasn't her mother-in-law, it was her unforgiveness towards her dad. And so she started to deal with these things. And God started to really put it on Cynthia's heart. You need to apologize to your mother-in-law. You need to ask her for forgiveness, and you need to forgive her for the ways that she's hurt you in response. Cynthia had a choice. Do I forgive or don't I? And she decided to forgive. Well, on a Friday night, her mother-in-law was dropping something off, and she met her at the door, and for some reason that night, her mother-in-law smiled at her. And Cynthia thought, tonight's the night. She hadn't prepared her speech. She really wanted to have a speech prepared, but she just started pouring it all out. I'm so sorry for the way I've treated you and everything. And you know what the mother-in-law's response was? She got this huge smile and she embraced Cynthia. And the two of them sat down and they talked for 2 or 3 hours. And they laughed and they hugged. That Sunday morning, Cynthia walks into church. She sees her mother-in-law across the church. And they just make a beeline like 2 teenagers to each other, and they hug and they laugh and they sit down and they enjoy the service together, and life just felt so good. And Cynthia wrote something about that time. She said, for the first time from the experiences of my dad and with my mother-in-law, I felt like I had been redeemed from the torturers. I had responsibly climbed out of the pit of depression, and I had not suffered depression since. Forgiveness was a major stepping stone in her life. You know, how many of you have ever seen a beautiful spider's web? And some of them can be beautiful, can't they? I forgot to put her coat up there. Sun catches it just right, maybe a little bit of dew on it or something. Spider's web can be a very beautiful thing. But sometimes we have to remind ourselves what they're there for. They're there to capture. They're there to trap. And unforgiveness can be a lot like this. Because what happens is, at first when we look at a spider's web, it looks attractive. It looks safe. But then it captures and ensnares. And once it does, the spider will inject venom into the prey, and the prey is eaten alive from the inside out. It's a very gross, very disturbing image. But if unforgiveness is a web, that bitterness is the poison that is injected and what begins to happen. Well, we're going to use that image to begin a series called Webs. And we're going to talk about unforgiveness. And today we're going to ask the question, why should I forgive them? How many of you have ever been challenged to forgive somebody, and either to yourself or to somebody else, or maybe somebody has said to you, why should I forgive them? We've all heard somebody ask that question. Sometimes we've been the person to ask it. Today we're going to try to answer that question so you're not entrapped, so you're not made more bitter, so you're not hurt, because that's the end result of unforgiveness. Now, before we get too much into forgiveness, we should probably define what it is and a little bit of what it isn't. There is a man he's a professor at UW-Madison. I believe he's still there. He may have retired in the last couple of years, but I believe he's still there. As of a couple of years ago, he had studied forgiveness for 38 years. I guess the guy just can't let it go. But for 38 years he studied, and he has become kind of the expert, the guru on forgiveness. And his name is Dr. Robert Enright. And it's funny because I read from a lot of different researchers studying about forgiveness, getting ready for this series, and almost every one of them quotes this guy. He's kind of the guru on forgiveness. And I read a transcript of an interview with him, and they asked him to define forgiveness. And in that interview, here's what he said. He said, "I see it as a moral virtue where you are being good to those who are not good to you without excusing." In other words, you don't just dismiss it as if your feelings of hurt and betrayal don't matter. That's not the case. It said, without forgetting, lest it happen again. You don't just ignore it and set yourself up for further pain. Without necessarily reconciling. There are sometimes the other person isn't ready to reconcile. Perhaps you need to forgive somebody who's passed away and reconciliation isn't possible. Reconciliation, restoring the relationship, is not always going to be part of forgiveness. And without throwing justice under the bus. Without saying it's okay that you treated me this way. That's not part of forgiveness. Isn't ignoring it. Your feelings are your feelings. You have a right to feel them. It's what you do with those feelings that is your choice. Dr. Enright, he teaches these things. I've said for years, and a definition you guys have heard me say before, how do you know you've forgiven somebody? Is when you want what's best for them. When you truly want them to thrive, to have the best possible life, you're really forgiving them. And if you're to a point where if you are given the opportunity to safely do something that will make their life better, and you can do it with a smile on your face, that's forgiving. It doesn't mean you forgot what happened. It doesn't mean that you excused what happened. But that's forgiving. And that's the goal that we're looking for throughout this series here. So Jesus, he taught a lot about forgiveness. And in the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, he has some great statements to say. We're going to take one of them today. I'm going to read it for you right now. And we're going to slowly take a few things out of it today and listen to some of his instruction, some of his words, some of his encouragement to us. So we're going to look here at Luke chapter 6. We're just going to look at 37 and 38. And you guys know my strange habit where there are underlined words. I ask you to say those with me. So do not be judged, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. There's a few thoughts in here today, but let me summarize what he just said in a very simple sort of statement. Jesus taught that forgiving others is what he wants us to do. It's what he calls us to do if we are his follower. And that as we do, good will come into our lives. And as we refuse to, our lives won't receive that good that he wants to give us. And this is the heart of why we forgive. Because let's be honest, sometimes we don't feel like it, do we? Let's look at just a few simple observations based on today's text. First one is this. Jesus told his followers to choose forgiveness. He wouldn't say forgive if we were all going to automatically do it. He wouldn't say forgive if it wasn't a possibility. He says forgive because he wants us to make that choice. This is all through Scripture, Old and New Testament. We're just going to look at a few scriptures. Honestly, I could put 40 scriptures up here if I wanted to. I'm just going to do a few of them, just to show you that I'm not kidding when I say this is all through Scripture. We're just going to look at some New Testament ones today. In the Gospels, it says this in Matthew 18, 21 and 22. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how many times must I forgive my brother who sins against me? As many as 7 times? Stop right there, guys. I'm always trying to teach you things to help you read the Bible more for yourself. I'm always trying to teach you little bits about their culture, about their beliefs. You hear the word 7, what do you think? Anyone want to shout it out? Completeness. Wholeness, completion, perfection, and beauty. This is the word 7 in Hebrew thought. So in the Old Testament, there are these verses where God talks about forgiveness. And so you have the Hebrew scholars of the day, the Pharisees, and some of these different people, they would try to come up with explanations on all this. And they came up with, well, 7 is the number of completion, so if a person does the same sin against you up to 7 times, you need to forgive them. 8th one, well, so Peter comes up to Jesus and he says, hey, is that right? Do we forgive 7 times? And what's Jesus' response? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, I tell you, but 77 times. Some translations will put it as 70 times 7. You keep forgiving. Does that mean we forgive 490 times and the 491st we cut them off? No, it's 7. It's completion. There's no end in sight. We invest in people and we care for them. That's the teaching of Scripture. Whenever you stand praying, Mark tells us, this is again Mark quoting Jesus, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven will also forgive your sins. Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, which is going to be used in that study coming up, also in Colossians 3, he has very similar verses in both that say this, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Forgive. Make it your choice. God, are you real? Do you know what they did to me? Do you know how bad that hurt? And you want me to forgive. Here's what I want you to understand. I want you to think about forgiveness in a slightly different light. Forgiveness is a choice. And that choice is what path we're going to take. Which direction are we going to go? And God is saying you can move towards this place of wanting what's best for them, or you can stay where you are in resentment. You can even choose to engage in bitterness and let that corrupt your heart and poison you to where you start walking away and wanting more and more to harm them. Choose to go in the right direction. If you look at it that way, there's something beautiful in that. And that's, God is saying, are you moving in the right direction? Not, are you there yet? I'm called to forgive. I'm trying to forgive them. I'm using the words, but in my heart I'm still struggling. You know what? That's okay. You're moving in the right direction. You're still taking steps. It's a journey. It's going to take some time to get there. God isn't saying, you got to be there now. God is saying, you got to move in that direction. And that's a lot easier to do, isn't it? It's a lot easier to live with. Here's the next thing. Refusing to forgive leads to a more painful life. We don't like to admit this. We don't like to talk about it if we're angry because we want to stew in our anger a little bit. That's normal. That is not unusual to want to stew in it. But a lot of research consistently shows that forgiving to refuse leaves you trapped in bitterness. The way that spider web can hold you. And that leads to more problems. National Institute of Health, it's amazing how many, when I was reading articles online, how many of these articles were either sponsored or on their website or something. And they had one researcher, and I'm going to probably kill this poor guy's name, Jishan Kim, and a couple others. They did this one article, and it's funny because they started with Dr. Enright's research, who we'd mentioned earlier, and they started looking at all these other articles and all these other researchers, and they concluded this, The negative health effects of unforgiveness are widely documented, which include, but are not limited to, stress, increased depression and anxiety, social isolation, and even compromised physical health due to stress on one's immune system. Those sound like things I'd like to avoid. How about you? But if you're trapped by bitterness, it's not going to do me much good to stand up here and say it's going to hurt you, is it? Because you're either going to want to stay trapped in it or you already know. If you've lived a bitter life for a long time, you know how it's affected you. You know the truth is, as much as we may or may not want to admit it, there's an old saying that says, refusing to forgive is like drinking poison and then waiting for the other person to die. Painful, but it's true. Why forgive? Because refusing to forgive can hurt those around you too. If it's not enough that you're afraid of hurting yourself, think about what unresolved anger and unresolved bitterness can do to the people in your life. It can hurt them as well. Sooner or later, as bitterness builds up, it starts pouring out. And it starts hurting other people. It seeps out. We have some football fans in this room, don't we? Football fans, there's kind of some rivalry between teams sometimes. I used to live halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Let me tell you, Green Bay and Chicago, they have a rivalry. In the last few years, it's been more Green Bay and Minnesota, hasn't it? And now I'm living right by Duluth. And once again, I find myself out of the frying pan and into the fire, huh? There's a little bit of a rivalry, too, between the Philadelphia Eagles and every other team in the NFL. And Eagles fans are known for being a little rude. So some of you may have heard this story in the last week. This has been in the news and everything. But a young lady, I believe she is from the Milwaukee area, but I could be wrong on that. Her name is Allie Keller. And her boyfriend, who is named Alex Bassera, they decided to go down to the wild card game in Philadelphia and go to their stadium and wear their Packers gear. So they wore their Packers gear and they go in to enjoy the game, and as they're walking in, Philadelphia fans are just ribbing them left and right. And mostly it's playful, mostly it's kind of fun. And they sit down, and there's this guy behind them that throws over a couple playful kind of remarks and everything, and they just kind of shrug it off. But something is wrong with this guy. He just won't let it go. And he starts to get really ticked that these Green Bay fans are in his stadium. Something tells me he wouldn't have a problem wearing Philadelphia gear to that stadium. He would have every right. But Green Bay gear in his stadium, he starts to feel entitled, and he starts to get angry. And he starts to get more and more rude. And as the game goes on, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the boyfriend, Alex, is like, I'm surrounded by Philadelphia fans. I didn't really feel like punching the guy and getting arrested for that. That probably wouldn't have ended well. So what does he do? He pulls out his phone and he just starts filming it. And this goes on for a while until this guy notices the phone and then backs off. But by then the damage was done. This guy had said some extremely wrong-headed and rude comments, and some that are very anti-women in this. For some reason, he put all his attention on Allie, not the boyfriend. They're both wearing Packer gear, but it's her that he just went after. And as this gets filmed, it didn't look good for him. So Alex puts this video online, and you know what happens? Within a couple days, over 30 million people had seen it. And within a couple days, this guy gets identified. His name is Ryan Caldwell. And Ryan Caldwell got savaged on social media. I watched a couple of the videos of people ripping him for his behavior. Ow. Turns out he worked for a firm that deals with diversity, equity, and inclusion. He had said some very bad things about women. Guess what? He no longer works there. The stadium saw the thing, the Eagles officials. He is permanently banned from ever stepping in that stadium again. Not just for an Eagles game, for a concert, for anything else. He is banned from that stadium for life. He hurt himself, didn't he? And I've heard a lot of news coverage this past week talking about how he hurt himself, but part of me wonders, is he the only one hurt? What about this young couple that has reporters camped out on their doorstep all this past week, and their names and faces all over the media? I saw where they did an interview with Channel 4 in Milwaukee the other day, and it's been a difficult time for them. Were they hurt because of this man's bitterness? Yeah. What about the company he worked for, which is a DEI firm that he did computer work for? How's this going to look to their prospective clients and things? Could this hurt their business? Yeah. I don't know about Ryan Caldwell's family situation, if he's married, divorced, single. Does he have kids who rely on his income? If so, they're hurt. Do you see how when anger and bitterness, it's like hitting a still pond and it ripples out? Do you see where there's a ripple happening in other people's lives because of what this guy did? Do you see how when a person is angry and bitter at their boss and they come home and they take it out on the spouse and the kids watch and learn this as normative behavior? Do you see how there's a ripple effect and other people are hurt by our bitterness and our angers and our jealousies and our rages? So why do we forgive? Because we're told to. We forgive because it hurts us if we don't. We forgive because it hurts those around us if we don't. If the stick isn't enough to encourage, let's look at one more thing. Let's look at the carrot. Why do we forgive? Because a life of forgiveness is a more abundant life. The life of forgiveness is really the best life. I love what Jesus said in that verse we looked at before, where he said, if you're giving to others, if you're forgiving, God is going to pour out on you. And he describes it as a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And this is an image all of you get. This goes back to the market of the day where you'd go up and you'd pay the guy for one measure of grain. And he would dip the thing in, and then he would kind of tap it and press down on it, make sure there are no air pockets, shape it, and then put a little more on until it's running over. And he wants to make sure he's giving you a full scoop, because this is a shame on our culture, another thing we talk about all the time. He wants to show you that he is generous. He wants to have a good name as a seller, so you will choose him over the other sellers. And he makes sure that he's generous in heaping when he gives you the portion that you paid for. When you give to God by loving another person, God gives to you generously as well. And he makes sure there's no pockets, no shortage, no failure. He makes sure to give generously because his name is also at stake. God gives fully to us. Well, Richard Moore, back during the Troubles in Ireland, where Ireland wanted to separate from Britain. Britain was fighting them to say no, and there started to be terrorist action and all these different things. British soldiers are patrolling Irish streets, and as they do, several times they were armed with rubber bullets. And a rubber bullet fires out of a regular firearm. It's a regular cartridge, except for instead of lead and copper in the end, it's rubber. And it's designed to hit a person but not penetrate. They're not sharp-tipped, they're more blunt-nosed, and they hurt because it is flying at the speed pretty much of a bullet. And when it hits, it will bruise, it could possibly break a rib, but it's not going to kill you, is the thought. Well, young Richard Moore, at 10 years old, is walking home from school, and a British soldier shot him with a rubber bullet. I don't know if it was on purpose or on accident. I don't know what happened. From the articles I read, they didn't really describe it, but they give kind of the impression that the soldier is just angry and he's bitter and he's fighting these Irish all the time and they're being mean to him, and he just took a shot at this kid, just to, I'll show you. expecting that it would just hurt. I don't know if it hit him in the head or what happened. The articles that I read a couple. They didn't give a tremendous amount of detail. But yeah, it caused him some pain. It also caused him permanent blindness. Richard Moore will never again be able to use his eyes. And something happened in him that he became just emphatic. I want to meet the soldier that shot me. And as an adult, he was actually given the opportunity to do that. And he sat down with this guy who had blinded him as an innocent child just walking home from school. And he said, I forgive you. I'm not mad at you for what happened. And then he goes on to describe the situation, and Roger, as an adult, said this. He said, after that, something peculiar and wonderful happened. Something inside me changed. Something paradoxical. I began to realize that the gift of forgiveness I thought I was bestowing on the soldier who shot me was actually a gift from God to me. It didn't even matter whether the soldier wanted or needed forgiveness. The gift freed me, leaving me with a sense of serenity and blessedness. And Richard said, all throughout my boyhood, my mother wanted the impossible for me, that I would be given back my sight. I even woke up one night to find my dear mother on her knees next to my bed, pleading with God. When I met the soldier and forgave him, I believe my mother's prayers were answered. I was given a new vision, and my real wound, the one that needed healing more than my eyes, was healed. His eyes weren't healed, but his heart was. And Richard found a more abundant life. How can I say that a forgiving life is more abundant? Because research proves it as well. Oh yeah, I love scientific research. I love reading psychology articles. I read a whole bunch of them this week, and they all agreed forgiveness is the better way to life. But one of the things that they talked about in here, which really surprised me, is you know what forgiveness does? Is it increases hope in your life. Forgiving people, research shows again and again and again, are more hopeful people. And I was really shocked when I looked at some of the groups that they did this research with, different researchers all coming up with the same thing. One looked at kids who were abused as children. One looked at kids who were abused through incest. One looked at widows. One looked at women in Pakistan who have been treated horribly over there by the Taliban and things. One looked at terminally ill cancer patients in the last month of life, and they found they were more hopeful after forgiving relationships that were broken. A terminal cancer patient's more hopeful, yes. Why? Very simple. When you think about it, it makes sense. When you refuse to forgive, part of your body is trapped in that moment. And I mean your body. Research shows that. Part of your development in your mind is trapped in that moment that the offense happened. And part of your heart is trapped in that moment the offense happens. Because your focus is there and you won't grow past it. You won't move past it. So you're stuck where that pain was. You're trapped. And when you forgive, you're now able to move forward. You're able to see a better future because you're no longer trapped in the past. And again, many of these researchers who came up with this quoted Robert Enright again. They found that through people forgiving, they developed a more optimistic view of the future. They had lower levels of depression. They had lower amounts of anger in their life. And they had less frustration with the day-to-day problems in life than they did before the forgiveness. One of the research for the NIH, said this: unforgiveness may continue to entrap victims in emotional prison, but forgiveness not only helps victims overcome anger, but also helps them find freedom to explore new possibilities for a better future. The restoration of freedom seems to be one of the paradoxes of forgiveness that forgivers experience when they make a courageous decision to let go of the past and move on. What a shock. Once again, research proves God was right. The forgiving life is the better life. We started today talking about Cynthia. I didn't tell you something. Cynthia is a person you may well have heard of before. Cynthia Swindoll. And her husband is Chuck Swindoll. And her mother-in-law was Chuck's mom, Lovell. And Cynthia and Lovell, their relationship just opened up so much that Friday night. Here's the bad part of the story. Monday afternoon, Cynthia didn't feel well. Lovell didn't feel well, so she decided to lay down. And after a couple hours not hearing anything from her husband, Chuck's father, went up and tried to shake her, and she wouldn't wake up. Started to notice she feels cold. And he called Chuck and he said, "I think Mom's gone." He went over there and she was. Cynthia mourned and continues to mourn for the lost years. But she gives a speech about this, and she says this. She says, "This process, these very acts of forgiveness are the brushstrokes on the canvases of our lives that portray the grace and mercy of the one who bore our sins on Calvary's cross. This process is what brings healing. We are released from the torturers, freed from the blaming, freed from the unrealistic expectations, and freed from the caricatures we created upon the chaff in the wind. From my experience, I encourage you not to wait too long. Today is the day to choose forgiveness." I love our worship team. These guys learned a song in the last couple days because it just so fit today. And I invite you to sing along if you wish to sing along, but really focus on the lyrics and really listen to this song and let it encourage your heart. And the song is Forgiveness.